Hello, my name is Alex, and I live with my wife Maria and our little daughter. I'm from California, USA, and I've been living in a small village in a mountainous region for a long time. It's a very small village with a low population and very few streetlights. This situation started not long ago. My wife and I were trying to have another baby, but after trying for a long time, we couldn't. So my wife decided to go to a woman in the village who is a witch and prepares all kinds of potions for various illnesses to help her get pregnant, in a way, for various problems, such as lack of love. Some may consider this an ignorant act on our part, but such beliefs are very common here in the village. I say common because I wasn't entirely sure it would work. What I wanted most was to take my wife to a good doctor who could help us. But my wife repeatedly refused, saying it was too expensive and that she trusted these types of remedies more. In the afternoon, we left our daughter with our neighbor and went to the woman's house, which was located far above the village, in a house very distant from the rest of the village. When we got there, the first thing my wife said was that she felt a very negative energy around the woman. She then turned to me with a threatening look and asked me to please go outside because she wanted to talk to my wife and wouldn't let me come in, telling me to wait outside. I went outside, but first I told my wife that I would be outside if she needed me. About 40 minutes passed, but my wife still hadn't come out, and I couldn't hear anyone. It was getting darker, and I was scared because we had to walk back to the house in the middle of the mountains, and in the deep darkness of those areas, only the sounds of animals could be heard. I gathered my courage and knocked on the door, but no one answered. 5 minutes passed, and I knocked again, saying, "Maria, is everything okay? We need to go." But in response, I heard that woman scream that I couldn't come in and that they would be done soon. I started to get more and more worried. I was about to force my way in. I saw my wife coming out. She looked shocked. I asked her, "Is everything okay, honey?" She just nodded yes. As I walked, the old woman didn't come out. She just closed the door, and we continued walking in complete darkness. I asked her what she had said to that woman and why she had stayed inside so long. But she couldn't answer me. She looked very confused and just said she couldn't remember what had happened. I was surprised and asked her, "How can you not remember anything? Did she do something to you?" But she said no. She just couldn't remember because she was very tired and wanted to go home. She only told me she remembered the woman giving her something to drink, that it was a medicine to help us have a baby. She said she couldn't remember anything after that. I was worried, but I didn't want to say anything to her because she seemed so confused. We finally got home, and I put her to bed to rest. The next day, I didn't bring up the subject, and I felt a little uncomfortable about the situation. When I asked, Maria snapped at me, so I decided not to talk about it anymore. We continued our daily routine as normal. A few months passed, and finally, the news we had been waiting for so long arrived. Maria was pregnant. I can't tell you how happy we both were. But a few days after receiving this news, very strange things started to happen. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, we turned off all the lights, and immediately afterward, we started hearing laughter outside my house. The sounds came from women, or rather ladies. I turned on the light and looked out the window because it wasn't normal for anyone to be there at that hour. It was a highway, and cars only passed by during the day because it was a mountainous area and dangerous. So I looked out the window, but there was no one there. Everything was quiet and dark. Not seeing anyone surprised me, because my wife and I could clearly hear those sounds and laughter. My wife asked me who was outside, and I said no one. She looked at me suspiciously, but said, "Let's go to sleep." We were very tired, so we tried to sleep. A short time later, the same laughter and women's whispers began to be heard outside my house again. But this time, we didn't just hear them. We also saw their shadows through the window. There were several women, and from their silhouettes, they appeared to be very thin, elderly women with long, messy hair. They were moving closer to our window, and the laughter was getting louder and louder. I felt an indescribable chill run through my body. My wife stared in horror, unable to believe what she was seeing. She asked me, "Honey, who are they? What do they want?" My throat was tight with fear, and I didn't know what to say. I slowly got out of bed, trying not to make a sound. I slowly opened the curtain, just to peek outside. But there was no one there. I opened the curtain completely, looked to the sides, and could clearly see shadows on the ground, quickly moving away from my house and disappearing into the darkness. Anyway, they were flying, but I couldn't see anything else. I told my wife what I saw, and the first thing she did was check on our daughter, but she was asleep in her room. I picked her up and brought her to sleep with us. That night, I didn't sleep, protecting my wife and daughter because something wasn't right. And whatever was wandering around our house wasn't good. Days passed, and hearing those women's voices became more and more frequent. The women were wandering around our house and disturbing us. We had long since given up. We were helpless for the safety of ourselves and our daughter. But there was nothing we could do, until my wife suggested calling a priest to bless the house. So we did that. We called the village priest and told him what was happening. When the priest came to our house, he turned to me and said, "Son, there is something very bad here. I can feel it." I didn't know what to say. I just asked him why this had happened to us. Even though we were good people and believers in God, we had never done anything bad. He asked me when these events had started. I told him it had been happening since we found out Maria was pregnant. He turned to me and said there had been a strange incident before that. I told him about the woman who was a healer. I said we were there, and she gave Maria a medicine to get her pregnant. She just closed her eyes and shook her head as if to say no. I asked her what was wrong. She said we had to leave immediately, that the woman was a witch who had lived on top of the mountains for years and performed satanic rituals with other witches, who never came down, because their appearance was frightening and they didn't mix with normal people. They killed animals for food and had no electricity, living only by candles and fires, as in the 19th century. But what they were most known for was that they liked to steal newborn babies and sacrifice them to drink their blood, so they would become younger and stronger. There were many pregnant women at that time, and women who disappeared while about to give birth. So many women went missing that the villagers began keeping watch every night, until one day, in the late afternoon, as it was getting dark, a pregnant woman was walking home when a man keeping watch from his window, said he, saw four women suddenly emerge from the mountain. The man described them as almost elderly, frightening looking, extremely thin, tall, with long, gray, unkempt hair, all dressed in white, and their skin seemed to cling to their bones. Emerging from both sides of the road, they cornered the woman, staring at her stomach and laughing in a hair-raising manner. The man ran out of his house and alerted his neighbors. The neighbors immediately came out and shouted at the old women to leave the woman alone. As soon as they saw us, those women or whatever they were, ran off and disappeared into the mountains. We all ran to help the girl and asked if she was okay. She was in shock and couldn't speak for several days. The fear she felt was so great that she couldn't utter a single word, because she had seen them up close and felt their evil, and that they had come to take the baby she was still carrying. All the villagers went looking for them to take justice into their own hands, but they were never found. It is said that they hid in the highest part of America and never came down to catch their prey. In that case, I guess your victim is your wife. When you went to that woman's house and gave her that substance, they most likely drugged her so they could call the others and perform a ritual with your wife's body to get her pregnant and then take her baby. Son, you must leave here immediately because your wife and baby are in great danger. I couldn't believe what was happening. I started crying and kept repeating, "Why is this happening to us? We just wanted to be parents." I kept repeating. My father hugged me and said, "Listen to me. Get out of here as quickly as possible." I didn't want to tell my wife what my father had told me, because I didn't want to scare her or harm her because of her pregnancy. I just told her we had to leave and that we would live with my uncle for a while. She looked at me in shock and said, "When were you planning to tell me this? We have a home here. I don't want to stay in someone else's house," I convinced her. I told her we would earn a very good salary and that, over time, we would be able to buy our own home with a better quality of life in the city. So we started packing everything up because we were planning to leave the next day, and everything was ready. We went to sleep, and not long after we lay down, we heard laughter outside our house again, and I felt a fear I still can't explain because I knew what it was. I took the rosary my father had given me and pointed it at the window, shouting, "Go away, you're not welcome here. Go away." My wife looked at me suspiciously and asked who it was. I didn't answer her question and kept telling them to leave, but all that came from behind the window were mocking laughs. They kept getting closer, until they were close enough that I could see their shadows. At that moment, I was more angry than afraid. I got out of bed, opened the window, and there were 4 women there, dressed in white, their hair white, their faces sunken into their bones, the hollows under their eyes deep, all of them slowly approaching my window, looking at me and smiling. My wife screamed so loudly that my daughter started crying. I was still pointing my rosary at the window, telling them to leave my house, that my house was blessed and they couldn't come in, but they didn't seem to care. Those horrible old women kept laughing with their cackles, and I can still hear that laugh at night when I'm sleeping. I closed the curtains and called the priest. The priest told me he was coming to my house and that we should not leave or open the window again under any circumstances. The 3 of us waited patiently, hugging each other. I tried to calm my wife and daughter, telling them that everything would be fine and that the priest was on his way, but they were still crying hysterically in fear. To be honest, I was scared too, but I had to appear strong to calm my family down a little. Minutes passed, and when we finally heard the priest's car arrive, he had come with another priest. We heard them scolding them with prayers. We could hear those witches mocking the priests as they walked away. Suddenly, there was no sound. The priest knocked on my door and said, "Son, open the door. The witches are gone." I ran to open the door and hugged him, crying, thanking him for helping us, because I don't know what would have happened without them. They stayed at my house all night, all of us staying awake in the living room, waiting for dawn. No one could sleep. At dawn, we loaded all our suitcases into the truck and left, leaving behind our whole life, our home, and our friends who had grown up with us in that village. But I couldn't explain to him the peace we felt when we left there and came to the city. We built a new life here. We never heard from those witches again. We had our baby, and now he is a beautiful 6-year-old boy. We are very peaceful and happy, but we will never forget the painful experience we had with those witches in that village. A few months ago, we learned that the priest who helped us had passed away, and a friend from the village, unaware of what had happened to us, gathered all the villagers to warn them about women who stole newborn babies after the priest left the village, and he almost forbade them from going to that healer because he said he was a bad person. He didn't go into details. He just told us all to watch out for each other and not to neglect our babies or pregnant women in any way. My wife and I are not sure what those witches are, whether they are still there or if they are dead, or if they are still doing evil in the village. The only thing we are sure of is that we will never go back. Before moving on to the next story, I'd like to ask you to like this video so I know you enjoyed the content. Thank you very much. Let's continue. Hello, I'm Arthur, and this story took place many years ago when I was a child, living with my family and my older brother James in a village near Los Angeles, about 4 blocks away from our house. There was a very large lake, about 6 blocks in size. On the other side of the lake, there was only forest, abundant vegetation, and some animals. It was an ideal place to play with my friends from the neighborhood. We would gather in front of the lake every day because there were plenty of games for children and lots of space to run around. However, there was a dark side to this place, because every night at sunset, deep in the forest at the bottom of the lake, some women would gather, light a fire, and recite all kinds of strange prayers and hymns. All the parents in the area forbade us from going near there, and we had to return home before sunset. Otherwise, we would be scolded and severely punished. One day, when I was a little late, I didn't understand why there was such a fuss, but I understood over time. My brother James, who was 19 at the time, was chatting and hanging out with his friends in front of the lake. But one day, one of them disappeared. My brother told my mom and dad that the last time they saw him, he left a friend's house around 10 o'clock. His name was Michael, and he lived on the other side of the lake. But he never made it home. They searched everywhere for him. His family reported him missing to the police, and a search was launched. But days and weeks passed, and he never turned up. My family was a little worried because that child had disappeared right there, and people in our neighborhood were starting to get paranoid, which was quite normal because another child who lived 3 houses away from us had also disappeared. One day he vanished without a trace. The last thing they knew about him was that he had gone to the lake because he had left his backpack there, but he never returned. All the neighbors were worried because the missing children were now grown up and big. Who could have kidnapped them? We found out the answer a while later, when my brother's best friend came home one day with his clothes and body covered in scratches. He had scratches on his arms, chest, and face, and he was in shock. He couldn't speak until the next day to explain what had happened. He was returning from his girlfriend's house. It was 11 p.m. He was crossing the lake. It was dark everywhere, and only the sound of the wind could be heard. He saw a woman signaling him to come over. She was an older woman, but she didn't look that old. He estimated her to be around 60 years old and responded to her. The woman asked him if he was okay, and he said yes, but that he needed help because his shopping bags had torn and he needed help carrying everything. He said he couldn't do it alone. He kindly went over to help her and assisted her. Yes, but I need help because my shopping bags are torn and I need help carrying them all because I can't do it alone, she said. He kindly went to help her and said he couldn't see well because there was a lot of mud around the woman. He could only see from her waist up. When he got there, he saw that none of the shopping bags the woman said she had dropped had fallen to the ground. When he looked up at the woman, he said he saw that her face had completely changed. Her gaze was cold and piercing, and her long nails were almost like animal claws. Seeing this, he tried to run away. But when he turned around, he saw that he was surrounded by old women. They were all staring at him and approaching him with their huge, sharp nails. He tried to escape, but they all grabbed his legs and arms, immobilizing him. He struggled to break free, but in return, he received numerous scratches from these women. The women told him that fighting was useless, that he would never escape, that he now belonged to them, and that he shouldn't worry, that everything would be over much sooner than he thought. Of course, the only thing he could think about was how he had ended up here. They took him deep into the forest, bound him completely, and placed him next to the fire. At that moment, they all began to take off their clothes and started performing rituals, speaking in languages she didn't understand, smearing the blood they drew from cuts all over her body. She was very scared, but she hadn't lost hope of escaping. She looked around and saw strange figures made of branches in the trees and strange figures made of animal bones, or so she thought. Now he had lost hope because these witches finished their rituals, took a sharp branch, and slowly approached him. He knew what was coming. He just closed his eyes tightly. But suddenly, he heard a scream. It was some gentleman on horseback, shouting at the old women to leave him and take his clothes. They took his clothes and fled. The gentleman approached and untied him, asking if he was okay. But Rodolfo couldn't utter a single word. He was in shock, and who would have gotten themselves into this situation if they knew they were about to die? The gentleman took him home because he was pointing with his finger where to go. They left him at the door, knocked, and left. Probably because they didn't want any trouble, because they didn't want any problems. When his family opened the door, they saw him covered in blood, his clothes torn, and in shock. His mother started crying and asked him what had happened, but he couldn't say anything. When he told them what had happened, his father went to the police and filed a complaint. Everyone knew what the women who sat by the lake every night, lighting fires, did, but they were never found. The police went to investigate the area and, as he said, found animal and human bones hanging from the trees. They took them away for examination. Unfortunately, one of these bones belonged to my brother's friend, who had disappeared without a trace, and the other belonged to our neighbor, who was never heard from again. These witches were never found. What happened was published in the newspaper, and years passed, but no trace of them was ever found. This incident affected our lives for a long time. My brother was too scared to go outside, afraid he would be the next victim. This happened when I was little, when my family and my two brothers and I lived in a small, single-story house. My brothers and I slept in a room with a window facing the street. My youngest brother, who was 5, woke us up every night because he was always looking out the window and talking to someone. We would put him back to bed and fall asleep. This went on for a while, until one night I asked him who he was talking to. I thought he would say, an imaginary friend, or something like that. But he told me he was talking to a woman. He said she gave him candy and told him to come with her to give him toys, but asked him not to tell anyone. This scared me a lot, so I told my family. When they heard this, they stormed out of the house and headed towards the house on the corner, which I thought was very dilapidated and dirty, even abandoned. They banged on the door so hard that probably the whole neighborhood heard it. I didn't understand what was going on. Suddenly, the door opened a little and an old woman stuck her head out. The moment I saw her, I was immediately scared, without knowing why. She looked unkempt, her gray hair was dirty and messy. The bags under her eyes were very noticeable, her clothes were worn out, and she had a defiant look and a mocking smile, as if she knew why my mom and dad were there. My mother and father reproached her, because they knew she was the one who stood in front of our window every night talking to my little brother. She was notorious for rumors that she was a witch, and it was said that she had kidnapped many children over the years. She lured them with candy and gifts. She took them to her house, and they were never heard from again. When the old woman heard my parents' complaints, she let out a long laugh. She was mocking them. Her laughter was My parents just told her to stay away from us and left. The next night, I woke up at exactly 3 o'clock. I felt someone watching me. I looked at my little brother's bed, but he wasn't there. I looked at my other brother's bed, but he wasn't there either. I went outside to look for him, thinking he might have gone to the bathroom, but I couldn't find him. I realized something terrible had happened and immediately went to wake up my family. They jumped out of bed in fear, and we started looking for him everywhere in the house. The house wasn't very big, but my dad went out into the street and started shouting his name. After a while, he came back in, crying, and said to my mom, "He took him, he took him." My mom turned pale. They immediately understood what had happened and knew what was going on. My mother asked anxiously, "How do you know? Did you see him?" My father grabbed him by the arm and took him to the old woman's house. I followed them. The door was open, and we went straight inside. I immediately wanted to vomit. There were animal remains everywhere. The smell was nauseating. There were symbols I didn't understand drawn on the walls, and on the table were very strange talismans with hair and figures tied to them. But as we continued searching, suddenly my father and mother started crying so heartbreakingly that even now, when I remember it, my hair stands on end. They found my little brother's small pajama shirt, but there was no trace of him or the witch. They had vanished without a trace, and we never saw him again. We reported it to the police. Searched everywhere for years for him and the witch who took him, but we never found them. Over time, my mother fell into a deep depression, slowly deteriorated, became ill, and died. My father is old now, but he still hasn't lost hope that one day my brother will walk through the door, even though we both know it won't happen, because we know in our hearts that the witch used him and all the other children she stole to rejuvenate herself and then disappeared. Now, I'm an adult and have 3 children who were so traumatized by this incident that there are no windows in our house and they sleep in the same room with us. They don't understand this yet, and I know they will soon grow up and need privacy. But I won't let them out of my sight. I know I'm paranoid and overprotective, but I just want to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. That no witch approaches my children, watches them, and then disappears. I invite you to subscribe, for more content. It's scary. Like the video and share it with your friends. There's a lot of content coming. Help me spread the fear. See you next time.